Just a heads up to you folks sitting with a notebook and pen, MISCHKE, the new podcast here in Garage Logic Land, is now coming out twice a week, Wednesdays and Fridays. If you're in fact scribbling this down, Wednesday is kind of tough to spell. It's not like it sounds. You want to spell it W-E-N-Z, but that, of course, would be a mistake. Friday is spelled just like it sounds. You're going to be okay there, but Wednesday's a bugaboo. Let me tell you, people, just a pain in the patootie. Jeez, it's hard. If any of you seniors are listening, I would like you to sit down. If you're standing, you could fall, and if you fall, you could die, so sit. My name's MISCHKE. Come on, sit. Sit. I don't mean to talk to you like you're a basset hound, but please, sit. There you go. Now here's a treat for you. It's a show that you can listen to. My podcast. Without worry of falling down. I don't mean to make light of this falling business, but wait a minute. Yes, I do. The headline was a disturbing one. More senior citizens die in falls in Minnesota than almost any other state in America. Did you catch that? More senior citizens die in falls in Minnesota than almost any other state in America. Wait, what? How is that possible? I would think you would be far more likely to die in a fall in, say, Utah or something. Those mountains are way higher out there. Tough to recover from a fall in Utah, I would imagine. Actually, what might be happening with Utah is, the elevation is greater, so you're falling from greater heights than you would in Minnesota, but Mormons don't drink. That's going to make falling a lot less likely. It's well known that Minnesota seniors love their hooch. Why? Well, because it makes life more joyful. While they're falling, they're smiling, sometimes even giggling, and then they die. Mormons, on the other hand, just sort of sternly live on and on and on till the end with that look of fortitude on their faces, grinding it out. Yuck! I want to die falling in Minnesota. Now, why aren't, say, the Montana folk dying in greater number? You can fall from some serious heights in Montana. Even on the eastern half of the state, there are some cliffs that can do you in if you fall. Well, there's something going on in Montana. Nobody is entirely sure what it is, but Hank Williams Jr. has weighed in on it. Few out there have tried harder to die in a fall than Hank Williams Jr. He fell over 500 feet off a mountain in Montana. That's like falling from a 50-story building. And he's still out there today, smiling, singing. A lot of senior citizens heard about that way back then, and they moved immediately to Montana. A whole slew of senior citizens headed out to Montana after Hank Williams Jr. survived that fall off that mountain. And to this day, they're just not falling and dying out there like they are in Minnesota, according to all the research. What's going on in Minnesota? Are they falling on landmines? How could they be falling on landmines, you're asking? Well, they might have been left there by the Dakota Indians. Left there from the 19th century, from way back in the Dakota Uprising. A lot of people may have forgotten about the big Dakota Uprising. The landmines then, I'll grant you, were primitive. But they were landmines nonetheless. I looked into this, and the Dakota would dig a cone-shaped hole, fill it with gunpowder, and cover it with rocks. It was triggered by a flintlock connected to a tripwire. Now, it often was unreliable because black powder is rendered useless when it gets damp, and of course it would be susceptible to dampness in the ground. But I think our senior citizens could be finding those mines and falling on them, and it sounds like falling on them left and right. Coincidentally, assisted living facilities in Minnesota have been built right in the path of those mines. That was a gaffe someone needs to take responsibility for. Almost all our assisted living facilities are on old Dakota Indian territory. Do people think about this stuff at all? In Montana, the natives there did not use landmines because the ground was so much harder. Imagine if Hank Williams Jr. had fallen 50 stories and then landed on a mine. Just when he's thinking, this fall is nothing. This is Montana. I could fall from twice this height and be fine. Suddenly, there's a landmine below him, courtesy of the Blackfeet Indians. At first, it just looks like a dream catcher, but then, kaboom! Wait, that wasn't the Blackfeet Indians. That was a misplaced pipe bomb courtesy of Teddy Kaczynski, the Unabomber. Ted would build landmines out of squirrel meat. Anyway, the big news is Minnesota senior citizens are dying in falls at a greater rate than senior citizens in almost every other state, and no one seems to know why. Well, almost no one. I know. I know why. Think about it. Minnesota. Hello. Ding, 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 ding. What do we have in abundance in Minnesota? Lakes. Water. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to realize our senior citizens are falling into lakes. They are drowning people. Our senior citizens are all drowning. They are falling because they are old, and they are drowning because, as a species, we have yet to learn to breathe underwater. Consequently, in my neighborhood, me and my next-door neighbor have started a program where we hand out life jackets to senior citizens walking down the sidewalks. We've had hundreds of life jackets donated to us, and all the senior citizens get one if they're passing by. Now, they look ridiculous, I'm not going to lie, but what's worse, looking like a dork walking through town or drowning? Actually, since I've never drowned, drowning might be preferable. There's two things I'd be uncomfortable wearing walking through my neighborhood: a life jacket and a black lace teddy. Now, you might say, what about a big, goofy rabbit outfit? No, those come with something that goes over your head. Whereas I called Victoria's Secret, and the lace teddy does not come with headgear. I'd be spotted easily. Is that MISCHKE there? Yeah, I think it is. What's he doing? Well, he's not wearing his life jacket, I'll tell you that. No, that is not a life jacket. What is that? So, no headgear with a black lace teddy, unfortunately. Actually, I take that back. My neighbor, he has headgear with his lace teddy. It's not sanctioned. It's his own unique creation. It's some antler contraption and what looks like kind of a miner's light. Fred is an innovator. Interesting guy. But if he's visiting you, you have to send him home before it gets dark or things get weird. I like Fred, but not after sunset. Anyway, where was I? Oh yeah, Minnesota senior citizens are falling and drowning. And if it continues at this rate, it's believed that the state of Minnesota will have a population lower than that of Wyoming by the end of autumn. There's been a lot of rain this summer. Officials with Minnesota state government offices say if you know CPR and there are puddles in your neighborhood, take a shift standing near one. Take a 2-hour shift. Let someone else come and relieve you. They'll take a 2-hour shift. You know what I've gotten in the habit of doing? Placing notebooks and pens by all the puddles in our area so that should the seniors be revived, they can jot down their near-death experience while it's fresh in their memory. It's sort of my own version of a a neighborhood little library. You know those little libraries that have popped up all over by the sidewalks? You're walking down the sidewalk, there's a little wooden house-shaped contraption, free books for people to read and then return. Well, this would be stories people could read about what senior citizens saw after they died and before they were revived. If we collected enough of those stories, I would like to create a book. I'd title it something like Old People Falling, Drowning, and Talking to God. Or I'd title it, Eat Your Heart Out, Hank Williams, Jr. You failed to die, and thus never saw the afterlife. You could have met your dad had you fallen in Minnesota. You could have met Hank Sr. You could have joined him on that lost highway. He never got out of this world alive. You could have howled at the moon with old Hank. You could have said, "Move it on over, Daddy. I, too, have seen the light." But you cannot die falling in Montana. You have to come to Minnesota, where we will revive you before you're gone for good. We have a bunch of Gen X folk hanging out by all the puddles and the lakes and the rivers, and we have notepads and we have pens. So go see the light, folks. Go see the light. I saw the light, I saw the light, no more darkness, no more night. Now I'm so happy, no sorrow inside. Praise the Lord, I saw the light. MSP is Minneapolis-St. Paul Plumbing, Heating, and Air. I've always wanted their name changed to Trust. It's a couple more letters, but MSP has been trusted in the greater Twin Cities metro area. Ready for this? Since 1918. You're going to hear me talking about them a lot in the coming weeks and months, and I'm kind of giddy about that. My oldest pal on this planet has been at MSP impressing the world for a long, long time, and he taught me why MSP is the plumbing, heating, and air conditioning company to trust. Trust is one of the more powerful sensations there is. Within trust is this idea that you can now relax. Everything's taken care of, and taken care of by people who will do the work so well that afterward there will be this feeling of almost surprise on your part. Wow, these guys do astonishing work. It's like their own family lives here or something. And trust means more still. It means they'll warranty their work. You can call them weeks afterwards with questions. They're not going anywhere. They're not ditching you. They like you, and they have since 1918. Plumbing, heating, air, MSP is what you need to remember. Trust.
At Arizona State University, we're bringing world-class education from our globally acclaimed faculty to you. Earn your degree from the nation's most innovative university. Online. That's a degree better. Learn more at asuonline.asu.edu.
Are you really, really good at investing? Super smart with your money? Do you understand every nuance of an IRA, a 401k? Have you mastered everything associated with your retirement savings plan? Are you a freaking financial genius? Well, then you won't be needing the help of Josh Arnold, will you? For the rest of you, Josh Arnold is the maestro of the market, the intellect of investment, the sage of savings. And he is waiting right now to provide you a 48-minute consultation free of charge. To not take him up on a free 48-minute consultation is to claim to be a financial wizard and investment genius, and you are not. You are simply not. I can practically see you through the speaker, and you are absolutely not. So call Josh at 952-925-5608. Tell him where you heard about him.
Investment services offered by Josh Arnold Investment Consultant, LLC, a security and investment advisor. Past performance is no guarantee of future results. All investments involve risk. Tommy MISCHKE is a paid endorser.
David Litt is a former senior speechwriter for Barack Obama. He was dubbed the comic muse for the president for his work on the White House Correspondents Association dinner monologues. He's written speeches and jokes for athletes, for chief executives, for philanthropists. He was head writer and producer in the Washington office of the comedy studio Funny or Die. And he has written his third book, the one I want to talk to him about. Its title is It's Only Drowning, and it centers on a rather improbable friendship that develops between David, who is a Yale-educated liberal, and his brother-in-law, Matt, a tattooed truck-driving electrician who listens to the podcaster Joe Rogan and never registered to vote. In essence, they're complete opposites. But despite the fact that the book is funny, and it is funny, the message is not so much funny as it is important and rather enlightening. David ends up bonding with Matt through their shared pursuit of the sport of surfing, something Matt gets into first and David later. And David is nowhere near as great a surfer as Matt, but it does provide them some common ground that then blossoms into more than just a love of surfing. This is an extraordinary book in that there are a lot of things going on at the same time. I really enjoyed it. Again, It's Only Drowning, a true story of learning to surf and the search for common ground. David Litt, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
I always wish that I could catch guys like you at the start of the book tour. This is probably 72 interviews in. What are the odds of me coming up with an original question, do you think?
Well, I like your odds, in part because I do think there are lots of different things we can talk about. So let's see. Maybe your last question can be whether we covered any new ground, which would in and of itself be a new question.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. Tell me if I have this right. During the pandemic, you experience depression. Your mind is one that was built for something like the pandemic to take down, correct?
I've always been prone to catastrophizing a little bit, always been an overthinker. When the pandemic happened, it was both that a catastrophe was occurring and we were more alone with our own thoughts, all of us. There was this need to adjust to more uncertainty and this sense of whatever track I was on, that got derailed. I think one of the reasons that I started surfing was that Matt was a surfer and I could see him really thriving during the pandemic and able to deal with the fear that is a part of life, the uncertainty that's a part of life in ways that I was really struggling with. And I had no idea what I would do that was like him in most respects. Right? I wasn't about to buy a motorcycle. I wasn't about to start listening to death metal. But surfing, I guess, seemed like a thing that was in his world that I could sort of imagine incorporating into mine.
Describe Matt for someone who doesn't know him. We're going to learn more about you as we talk about you, but Matt's not here. Describe him.
The easiest way of talking about the difference between me and Matt is that Matt once threw out his back training to become an ultimate fighter, and I once threw out my back lifting a bag of cat litter. So we're quite different people. I mean, Matt is, we always got along. I met him back in 2012, but we got along sort of at a distance in part because we just had nothing in common. I mentioned the death metal, the motorcycles. His left shoulder has a giant tattoo of a robot that is clawing through his own skin and revealing muscle and machinery underneath it. And I once asked Matt, so, why did you get that tattoo? Right? As an overthinker, I imagined that he would at least go into a very long series of reasons and whatnot. And instead, he just looks at me and goes, I don't know. And I remember thinking, okay, I can't imagine getting a temporary tattoo without thinking about it extensively. So Matt and I were just always extremely different people and still are to a large extent. And it was really during this period immediately after the pandemic, when I was feeling particularly depressed and could see him thriving. That was the first time, it's a little embarrassing to admit it, but it was the first time where I kind of said, hey, wait a second, Matt has something to teach me about how to be a person in the world.
And the fascinating thing here is you marry into the family, so you marry his sister, and this must happen all the time where brother-in-laws are opposites, but you are going to be together in all sorts of functions for many years, and you're going to have to find a way to find some kind of common ground. But up until deciding to surf, your common ground was just sort of a general sense of civility with one another.
Exactly. I always knew that, Matt and I would spend a lot of time in each other's lives, right? Thanksgiving, Christmas, birthdays. But if you had told me 3 years ago that we were going to be friends, I would have said you were nuts. Matt texted me a video of him dirt biking in New Jersey. I didn't know we had dirt biking in New Jersey. He's dirt biking and he hits a puddle that turns out to be like a deep sinkhole, and the bike just sinks. And, it's first person because he's recording on a GoPro on his helmet. And I text him back and I was like, I'm glad you're okay. That looked pretty scary. And he was like, nah, it was fun. That didn't seem fun to me.
Yeah, in the book, you do have that scene where I believe he takes a photo of his forehead gashed up from surfing, correct?
Well, someone dropped a wrench on him.
Oh, that's right. It was a wrench. It was a wrench. You're the one who had the injury from the board.
Yeah, I had what I thought was this red badge of courage from getting hit in the face with a surfboard. I felt very macho and cool about it. And then I sent him a picture. So, I've got like butterfly band-aids on my nose, but I look kind of like a boxer after a fight. I'm thinking, all right, this is going to look pretty impressive. And then a few days later, he texts me back a picture of just this gash in his forehead and blood streaming down his face. Well, I'm not going to out macho him on this one.
Yeah, and he probably needed stitches, and he didn't bother to get them.
Yeah, it's interesting you said the word needed, because I would have said he needed stitches, and then I asked him and he said, nah, I just put a flap of skin over it and I was fine. I would have gotten stitches. He didn't get stitches, but he's doing fine and I'm doing fine. I think that's in a way one of the things that I learned over the course of the book. I know it sounds obvious, but there are just lots of different ways to live.
I know guys like Matt, similar personalities, similar interests, pursuits, similar views. I know guys like you, very similar backgrounds, similar tastes. I do understand that it's not typical for the two to get together and hang out with any regularity. The experience that brings you together is you learning to surf, a sport that Matt already had down. And because he enjoys that you are surfing and that he has someone to go surfing with, and because this is something you can talk about together and you can do together, you get closer. And now, how long has it been since you first started learning to surf? How many years?
3 years.
3 years. You're very close now, and you have this bond. I mean, it is an extraordinary tale of a friendship that forms through this sport of surfing, which people have to understand is not something that comes naturally to you and really is not something anyone would have guessed you would pursue. I still find myself wondering what you might have pursued as an alternative hobby if your brother-in-law wasn't a surfer, because I think with your mind, you would have had to find some way to come out of the depression, and it probably would have made sense for it to be something physical. That makes sense. And I just wonder what it would have been.
It's a really good question. I hadn't thought about that before, honestly. The right age to start surfing is generally considered to be 7 or 8 years old. 15 is pushing it. 20 is an old person, 25 is over the hill, and 35, which is when I started, is absolutely geriatric. I knew none of this when I picked up a board. I also, of course, like any guy picking up a hobby, initially thought, okay, I bet I have a lot of natural talent, so that'll be all right. It'll turn out I'm a surfing prodigy. And then shortly thereafter realized, nope, I do not have a lot of natural talent, so that's not going to help me. And I do think one of the reasons I stuck with it is that both I was afraid of looking like a wuss in front of Matt, so I didn't want to quit. But it was also that he, in a very quiet way, but a very generous way, encouraged me. Right? It was the fact that he was willing to get in the water with me. And if I were to start drowning, I think he probably would have stepped in and tried to save me, which is always a nice feeling. But I think more than anything else, it was this sense of he was willing to let me into his world. And no matter what you're talking about, it can be surfing or anything else in life, having someone who's a part of something and is willing to say, hey, I'm going to open the door for you, or I'm going to hold the door open for you, it makes a huge difference.
Up until reading your book, I looked at surfing about the same way I look at snowboarding. I didn't see surfing as any more complicated than snowboarding. I had a view of surfing that, sure, you have to learn to balance, and sure, you have to learn over time how to get good at this, but let's not make a bigger deal out of it than that. After reading your book, I realize that it's one of the more difficult things to do that there is in the world in terms of sports. The demands of it are rather extraordinary. I got so into it that after reading your book, I spent hours looking at videos of surfing, hearing surfers talk about it, listening to people explain what you need to know if you're even going to consider going into this. You had already covered a lot of this in your book, but I wanted to really feel the difficulty of it and also the allure. There's another thing that has never properly been passed along to the masses, those who don't surf. The rather almost mystical way people talk about the actual experience of riding the wave and how it becomes addictive and why people pursue something that involves often travel, a lot of waiting, a lot of disappointment, a lot of pain, a lot of injury, a lot of suffering, but for something that, at least for those people like you who keep at it, and you were just at it this morning, there's something there that either can't be translated to the rest of us or has not been translated properly. If it can be articulated, I'd like to know how you would articulate the feeling.
One of the things I kind of love about surfing as a writer is that I do think it is a feeling that is almost impossible to articulate, which is an irony or possibly a catch-22 for someone writing a book about surfing. But I'm going to try. So I think for me, the reason that surfing is not just fun, although it certainly can be, it has these moments of transcendence. And the reason when you hear surfers sometimes ad nauseum talk about surfing as a spiritual experience is because the ocean itself, for almost all of human history, has existed in this kind of metaphorical space, right? The ocean representing the infinite, representing nature, representing all of the things in our life that are beyond our control. And so interacting with the ocean, I think that's an important part of why surfing is different than other hobbies. The other thing that I would say is wave energy, which is what surfers are harnessing, is something you don't encounter anywhere else in your life. So I ski, for example, and I'm a pretty good skier. That's gravity, right? And so if you don't ski, you probably don't understand exactly how it feels, but you more or less understand what gravity feels like. If you don't surf, you don't know what a wave feels like because there's no analogy to it anywhere in the rest of your life. And what that means is that when you catch a wave, I was out this morning, or I'm thinking about the best wave I caught this morning, and it wasn't huge, but it did have this moment of transcendence. It's that moment you almost feel like you're entering a different dimension. And it's a dimension that exists only when you're on that wave, and it contains every other wave you've ever been on. And the moment you're off the wave, the first thing you think is, okay, I got to get back there, because it's so otherworldly.
Well, guess who's back supporting this show? It's like old home week, folks. Fury Motors. They advertised with me at KSTP. They joined me when I worked at City Pages doing a podcast there. They then made the leap to WCCO when I put in my years there. Then they joined me for over a decade at the Road Show, and now here they are again at Hubbard Radio. Wow! Fury Ford of Waconia does things the Fury way with their new and used cars. If you have not experienced the Fury way, you're getting your cars from the wrong people. Fury Motors of South St. Paul and Stillwater also does things the Fury way. They're a Chrysler, Dodge, and Jeep dealership, but they also sell every kind of used car, just like the Fury Ford dealership in Waconia. Fury Motors has been around since John Kennedy was president. Multiple generations doing things the Fury way. I experienced the Fury way, and it changed my view of buying a car. You owe it to yourself to give it a try. You don't owe it to them, but rather to yourself. Fury Ford in Waconia, Fury's Chrysler, Dodge, and Jeep dealership in Stillwater and South St. Paul. Learn the Fury way. I'm going to let you in on a little secret. The Eyewear Shop just voted Best Eyewear Shop in Minnesota by readers of the Star Tribune for the 5th year in a row is not going to be making you nearly as happy at their stores this month as they will at the Minnesota State Fair. At the State Fair, they're going to have a $59 frame sale on the first floor of the grandstand. Used to be a second-floor operation, but it's much cooler on the first floor, so they're on the first. Frames normally $250 to $800 will be just $59. Suddenly, the St. Paul, New Brighton, St. Louis Park, and Uptown Minneapolis locations don't look as inviting. $59 at the fair, and all you have to do is purchase prescription lenses. Hello? If there's a better deal in America in 2025, I sure have not heard of it. And I question the sanity of anyone offering a better deal than this. I think you have splinters in your windmill. I think you're a crumblehead. Learn more at spectacleshop.com.
And one of the things I love about surfing is you're in this group of people. You have no idea who they are, what their political beliefs are, what their cultural views are, but you're all chasing this same otherworldly, transcendent feeling.
There are gatherings of surfers where there are these conversations that are all about surfing, and I get it. I find myself understanding why it can be talked about endlessly. But you're going for something more than that. You're using surfing as your ticket into some kind of deeper relationship. And it comes across in the book as difficult for you to find that relationship beyond surfing just based on the book. He doesn't think about a whole lot of things real deeply. He's sort of enjoying life. You know, he may think deeply about this work he has to do as an electrician or this surfing, but philosophically or politically, he's not spending a lot of time on these sorts of things. He's in the moment, he's enjoying life, he's experiencing life, but he's not making it any more complex than it need be. And I don't find you somebody able to get in conversations with someone like that.
Well, it's interesting how you phrased it. And I would say I agree with some of what you said, and I would suggest a correction to some of it. What I mean by that is I think Matt is definitely better at enjoying life than I am, and I think I'm better at enjoying life than I used to be because of Matt. One of the things I would say, though, is one of the assumptions that I, to be totally honest, would have made when I started surfing with Matt is that he doesn't think deeply about something because he doesn't spend a lot of time analyzing it from all angles and trying to articulate it, which is literally my job as a writer in many cases. And I think looking back on that now, I think, well, that assumption was very off. I think it's less that Matt doesn't think deeply about some of the things that I think deeply about. Depends on the thing, obviously, right? The things I've learned from him are that there is a time for thinking and preparation and analysis, and there's a time for doing. And the thing that Matt is very, very good at on a surfboard, but I also think that's a metaphor, is his ability to commit fully once he's decided to commit. And that's something I've learned from him.
One of the things that you do talk to Matt about in the book is we learn in the book that he's not registered as a voter, right?
That's right. What I think is interesting is that Matt, sort of demographically speaking, is people like Matt when it comes to all kinds of different demographic characteristics. They swung toward Trump in the most recent election. They're not the core of the Republican Party these days, but they're the reason that Donald Trump was able to win the election and is president right now.
At one point, you asked him who he would have voted for, and he says probably Trump or Bernie Sanders. Now, I would have normally thought, wait a minute, what? Those two guys.
That's what I thought at the time.
But I had a buddy in Vermont telling me when Bernie dropped out of the race, was it in 2016? He said a lot of the people he knew who were Bernie people in Vermont were going, oh, Bernie's out? Well, we'll go with Trump. And that's also not as strange when you realize that Joe Rogan was a Bernie guy and swung toward Trump. There's a fascinating thing going on there that I don't think has ever been adequately analyzed. But when you ask Matt about this, Bernie or Trump, why? He says, well, they're the most entertaining. For me, that's a moment when I say to myself, okay, he's not deeply thinking this through. I don't believe Matt actually wants mostly to be entertained by the people who shape his world. But I think what it spoke to was the idea that when you get at the level of president, the whole thing's kind of too big, possibly corrupt, because Matt is a guy who, he doesn't like big anything. He doesn't like big pharma. He doesn't like big government. He doesn't like big corporations. He doesn't trust things that are big.
You actually hit on many, many important points in understanding our politics just in that question, because for him, I think it was this idea that if somebody is entertaining you, then in a way, it's a sign that they get you. And if somebody is boring you, I think that a lot of voters and a lot of Americans look at that and they don't say, oh, this just means this person is dry and focused on policy. They say, oh, this means this person isn't thinking about me. They think they're too good for me. They think they're better than me, or they're just thinking about stuff I'm not thinking about. And so I think that's behind that point that Matt was making. The other thing that you point out that I think explains the Bernie Sanders part, but the Joe Rogan overlap and the how did we end up in this moment is, as you said, this distrust of anything big. One of the things that the Joe Rogan world, and I only know this because Matt is a big Rogan fan, and I wouldn't say I'm a fan these days, but I've listened to some Joe Rogan and I pay attention to him because of Matt. Joe Rogan historically just doesn't trust anything that is too big for him to feel like, okay, I can wrap my head around it. Big pharma, big business, big labor, big tech, big government. So it's not right or left in the traditional sense of small government, big government. It's, are you on the side of the big things where people are telling me what to do, forces that I don't understand how they work? Or do you look at this and say, no, these aren't big things necessarily. We need institutions and we need experts and institutions to help us make sense of a world that is increasingly chaotic. And I think that's, again, one of the big differences between Matt and me. And it's not so much that we have completely changed, either of us, but I think we both understand each other much better than we did. And it's also why I was originally thinking about this book very much as just a surfing book. But then as Matt and I started spending all this time together, I said, wait a second, my understanding of where we are as a country has completely changed and I think deepened because of this experience. And so, it almost felt like that Godfather moment of, I wanted to be out of writing about who we are as a country. And just when I thought I was out, they pulled me back in.
For folks who need a reminder, the book is It's Only Drowning, a true story of learning to surf and the search for common ground. David Litt is the author. You time and time again make the point that this was not a guy who, if you take this surfing thing out of the picture, this was not a guy who you would have necessarily gravitated toward or become good friends with. Just too many differences, not enough in common. But this was actually the key point I came away wanting to ask you about after reading the book. What is it that makes someone you enjoy being around, someone you would want to befriend? For me, it doesn't make sense that it's having a lot of things in common. Think of how many opposites attract in marriages. Think of how many cases there are in America where the wife is liberal, the husband conservative, or vice versa. Carville and Mary Matlin, clearly that has not been the divider. So when you start with the premise that look at Matt and all he's into and who he is and what he's about, now look at me and what I'm into and what I'm about, what are the odds of he and I ever being friends? Why do we start there?
It's such a good question. And I think so much of it has to do with how our society has changed recently. You bring up James Carville and Mary Madeline, right? Some people are listening right now saying, hey, wait a second, this isn't all that rare. I have a friend where I don't have a lot in common with them, and in ways that cross these sort of culture war lines. That's becoming less and less true very rapidly. I didn't even know this until the book came out, but someone sent me a study. According to the definition of segregation that sociologists use to determine if an area is racially segregated, nearly all of us these days live in a politically segregated neighborhood. And even within neighborhoods, we tend to spend time with people, not just when it comes to politics, but when it comes to the way we see the world, opinions, culture, all of that. We tend to spend time with people who see the world the way we do, much more so than we used to, because we have a lot more choice. We have choice over what information we take in. We also have choice over who we spend time with online, which makes a big difference. People do not date across party or cultural lines at nearly the same frequency as they used to. So it's funny. I think that a friendship like the one between me and Matt would not have been particularly unlikely 20 years ago, maybe not even 10 years ago, but it's become very unlikely now. And particularly post-pandemic, when all of these cultural signifiers ended up becoming the foundation for this divide over vaccines, which I write about in the book. To get to the other thing that you were saying, which is, what do you look for in a friend? Many of us, our first instinct with friendships is to say, who do I have a lot in common with? And obviously having something in common with people is always very nice. But ultimately, thinking about it more deeply, I think it's about who can you learn from, right? I think about all of my good friends and the friends I value most, and Matt is one of them, but there's many others, and they have all kinds of different views. I think the common thread is I feel like I can be myself with them, that they know who I am, and they like that. And then at the same time, I feel like when I spend time with them, I am expanding who I am in some way. This idea to me of who can we learn from, and how do you learn from as many people and as many types of people as possible, not out of some moralistic view that that's what you're supposed to do, but just because you only get a certain amount of time on Earth, and that's a good way to spend it, right? It just makes it more interesting and more fun.
And I would say if the political differences came with a quality of the person being kind of a jerk about it, bringing it up all the time, hammering on it, throwing in some ridicule, well, there's not going to be a great chance of a friendship there. But now just picture someone who thinks differently than you, but is just a decent, good-hearted soul. At their core, they're just a good-hearted, decent human being. And they happen to think differently than you. I would argue there's nothing but openings there. There's openings in all directions there, because for me, that's at the core of what attracts you to another person. A basic goodness. Once you start there, boy, you could talk about anything. Their different views are still going to be coming out of a base of wanting good for people and wanting good for you.
I think that's right. I think it is such an easy trap to fall into, and I think it's easier than ever these days to assume that because someone sees the world differently than you do, you understand their motivations, and we're almost never jumping to conclusions about people's motivations that are overly generous. Usually it's the other way, where we're saying, okay, somebody believes this thing that I deeply don't believe, and so therefore they must be a bad person, or at the very least, they must have a set of really bad character traits, and that's what leads them to think the way they think. When I say this is a trap, I know it's a trap because it's one that I fell into quite a bit and still at times do. And part of, for me, the experience of surfing with Matt and of thinking about the experience so I could write the book was realizing that. And I tried to be honest about falling into that trap myself. And I think one of the things that happens when you spend time with someone is, as you point out, not everybody. Some people you might say, actually, the more time I spend with you, the less likely I think it is that I want to spend more time with you. But in many, many cases, you spend time with someone and you realize people are more complicated than that. And usually, even if you disagree, the disagreement is not rooted in that's because this person is just a bad person. There's often a fundamental goodness, even in people who make decisions you may think are totally wrong. My editor on the book, the first time we talked, he was talking about having a friend who he had really stopped speaking to right after the pandemic over vaccines. which was, I would say, the biggest dividing line between me and Matt as well. And over the course of editing the book, he reconnected with his friend, which was one of the things that made me really happy, right? Watching this happen with somebody with a very different friendship, and it sort of creating a second parallel unlikely friendship, or at least unlikely reconnection.
We placed Grandma in a nice memory care facility right down the street from our house. Now, it isn't the coolest place in the world. It doesn't have the best amenities. The staff changes over a fair amount, but boy, visiting is going to be easy. Well, aren't you a sweetheart, making sure life is easy for you? How's Grandma feeling about this? You visit for an hour and a half. They're there each day for an additional 20-plus hours. Who's with her? The best? The best out there? If she would be at the Welshire, that would be the case. The staff at the Welshire doesn't turn over because it's a joyful place to work. The residents there are comfortable because the staff knows how to keep them content. The place is designed solely for memory care, nothing else. Broken up into 4 different memory care quadrants, a sophisticated place, a loving, caring place, beautifully appointed for those 20-plus hours that you're not going to be around. The Welshire, remember the name, the Welshire of Bloomington and Medina. I remember when my quaint little bank became some national monstrosity that somehow got naming rights to football stadiums. I became a number pretty quickly after that. No more warmth, no more friendliness, no more talking to loan officers as if I know them about some unique loan idea I have and want to discuss with them. No more sense of me as an individual with my little banking concerns that I want to talk to someone about. No more feeling like my banker was sort of like my family lawyer or my family doctor. That's quite a loss. I thought all banks were going that direction until I found North American Banking Company. 6 different locations meant one was near me. And everything the other soulless banks had become, North American Banking Company rejected. They hearkened back to a time of personalization, of familiarity, neighborliness, actually knowing my name. I found my banking home at North American Banking Company. I thought that was gone forever. It was not. North American Banking Company, your new banking home.
North American Banking Company. Member FDIC, Equal Housing Lender.
I want to slide back into surfing just because one could have assumed with this book that you were going to use surfing as a subject for a book and as a way to connect with a brother-in-law, and after it was all over, you were going to move on because, again, you did not seem like a guy who would devote a lot of his life to surfing, but you just eventually got the bug. You actually were a person who's built and made to enjoy and love this endeavor.
I had always been the kind of person who was very goal-oriented, right? You pick a thing you want to achieve, you try to achieve it, you wonder why that achievement wasn't quite as satisfying as you thought it might be, and then you pick a new achievement to try to make up for it. But one of the things that always struck me when I talked with Matt about surfing is that he just surfed because he liked to surf, because he enjoyed it. And I didn't understand why someone would do something that it didn't have a sort of, okay, here's the next goal, here's the next goal. And now I surf because I like it. And I learned that that is not just okay, but so much more fun. So the fact that I am still surfing is, to me, a sign of the other broader ways that surfing changed how I see the world.
Is it Matt who delivers the line in the book? It's a rather simple line. If you're unhappy and then you go surfing, you'll be happy.
Yeah, he just kind of said that. Surfing just makes you happier. It's so simple, but it's also totally true. And one of the things that I found in a world that can be very overwhelming, and as somebody who continues to, I still read the news and worry, and I think there's a place in one's life for reading the news and worrying, but then also to be able to say, I have this other thing where it's just about going out and being happy. and saying, hey, I'm out in the ocean and that's real too, and just being able to enjoy it. Having that balance is something I feel like I picked up now in a way that I certainly didn't have when I was really dealing with depression during the pandemic.
You've traveled all around surfing. It isn't just going down to the beach in New Jersey where you live. Where all have you been in the world surfing?
We went to Santa Cruz, California, to France and Spain, to the Basque Country, because there's some really good surfing out there. And then finally, we went to Hawaii. And then obviously this isn't in the book because we're talking now and the book is already out. But Matt and I are thinking about where to go next. We're trying to think about whether to go back to Hawaii or maybe Guatemala.
When you're with Matt now, what's fun about being with him?
You know, it's nice to spend time with someone who knows you. I think what's interesting about surfing is you learn a lot about someone by how they surf, and you learn a lot about who they are, both good and bad, right? Matt has seen me chicken out on a lot of waves. On the other hand, he's seen me summon a level of courage and just go for it, and vice versa, right? I've seen him on a lot of waves, and we've kind of been through it together, sometimes in some pretty intense conditions. He has a sense of humor I also just really like. He's got a very dry, very, very like understated sense of humor that I didn't understand for a very long time. He's very quiet. He doesn't say a lot, but he's very observant.
Can you remember the line when you said, imagine if golfing, and then you went into something where you described golfing, but it had this element. That's what surfing is. Do you remember that line?
I think what you're talking about is where I said, imagine taking up golf and discovering that just walking to the first tee, right? Not swinging a club, not driving or chipping or putting, just getting to the tee box is the hardest thing you've ever done in your life. And that's surfing. Paddling a surfboard requires muscles that you have never thought about in your entire life unless you're a surfer. Right? You have muscles that hold your neck up, and you haven't thought deeply about those muscles since you were about 6 months old. Until you get on a surfboard, when those muscles suddenly are pressed into service and become incredibly important, craning your neck and trying to arch your back for minutes, sometimes even hours at a time. I don't know if you can know everything about someone from the way they surf, but you know exactly how they handle fear. Because even more than the physical side, surfing is about fear. And it's about that visceral moment when a wave comes up behind you. And there's almost an evolutionary instinct to say, I got to get out of here. I do not want to be in this situation. And surfing is about controlling that, and sometimes even about embracing it. If you watch someone surf, you get a sense of how do they handle that moment when they feel overwhelmed, that moment when they feel afraid. When you see people handle that fear, you learn a lot about them, and you learn a lot about yourself. And I think that's the other thing for me. Surfing transformed how I relate to fear at a pretty scary time to be a person in the world.
I'm glad you brought that up. In my deep dive into surfing after reading your book, I listened to interviews with the best surfers in the world the night before a competition, and how many of them talked about being frightened. That is not what someone talks about the night before the Super Bowl. They're excited about it. But the Beach Boys didn't sing about the fear. They didn't sing about the danger. They didn't sing about all the people who have died. They didn't sing about the insane, violent power of a wave.
Yeah, well, only one of the Beach Boys surfed, it turns out. So that may be why. And I forget which one it was.
Probably Dennis.
I don't know. I forget. If you have that fear, it means you're chasing waves that are challenging you. Very few other activities, especially activities that the vast majority of us can participate in, have that component where if you are doing whatever the thing is to the best of your ability, then it is going to make you extremely frightened.
Yeah, I don't know any other sport that has brought up the flower of fear. You know, when someone hands you a flower, that's a loving gesture. That's a wonderful invitation to connection. Fear is offering you something similar in your book.
Abject, instinctual terror, that's actually a sign that you're in the right spot. It's your body telling you that if you commit in that moment, you're in the part of the wave where it can propel you forward and you're going to get the ride that you're hoping to get. And that idea that fear is not only something to be overcome or avoided, But sometimes fear is something to be embraced and sought after. That completely transformed the way I thought, not just about surfing, but about all kinds of things in life.
What's the longest run you've had? How many seconds are we talking that you're enjoying this moment in this zone, this mystical moment, riding this wave?
The longest wave I've probably surfed was 30 seconds or something, which doesn't sound like a lot, but for surfers, that's a pretty long time. And that was probably in Santa Cruz, maybe some waves I've surfed in Hawaii. But the premise of your question, it suggests that time on a surfboard is the same as time off a surfboard. And I have learned that it's somehow sort of beyond time. And I know exactly how I sound when I say that. And I never imagined I would say stuff like that. Stepping outside of time, that's part of what makes it so addictive.
You put all these pieces together, the sheer amount of effort you put into learning to surf, the abuse you take, the elements that are often just miserable around you. And then you just mentioned the time, the duration of this. And granted, you're saying it's not about time, but it just makes, from the outside, this whole endeavor just sounds so much more fascinating. I'll never obviously be able to fully understand it. Those of us on the outside will always be on the outside, but it's far more interesting to me to think about. And the book, It's Only Drowning, is not a surfing book, obviously, because I'm not a surfer and I enjoyed the book. But life is interesting, and surfing in this book is part of life. And the way you talk about certain things in life, one can make anything interesting if one knows how to write about it, if one can be somewhat eloquent in describing something. So I'll leave it there. I know you're getting great reviews for this book, and I know people really like it, but just add me to the list.
Thank you for saying all that.
Absolutely.
I appreciate it. I'm glad you liked it.
David Litt is the author. It's Only Drowning is the book, a true story of learning to surf and the search for common ground. Was there an original question?
How many original questions? We covered all kinds of ground that I haven't had to think about. So that's exciting and a little scary. I really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time. I'll keep looking for your work.